Hey everyone, welcome to this explainer. Today we're diving straight into the glamorous and, let's be honest, pretty turbulent history of a true American retail icon, Bergdorf Goodman. We're going to trace exactly how a tiny tailor shop morphed into the absolute epicenter of New York luxury, how it shaped global fashion, and ultimately how it crashed headfirst into the harsh realities of modern corporate finance. Let's get into it.
Now, if you've ever strolled down Fifth Avenue, you already know the magic I'm talking about. The store's window installations are legendary. David Hoey, their window director, absolutely hit the nail on the head when he called them pure high fantasy. Because, really, this wasn't just about throwing some clothes on a mannequin. We're talking theatrical, museum-quality art designed to completely enchant you before you even step foot through the doors.
And once you're inside, well, legendary designer Isaac Mizrahi captured that feeling perfectly. You know how modern retail is usually full of loud music and chaotic, sprawling displays? Mizrahi pointed out the exact opposite about Bergdorf's. He talked about this profound stillness. He said walking in felt like stepping into a sanctuary, like if there was a hurricane or an earthquake outside, you would just be fine. That unique emotional safety, that feeling of being totally insulated from the real world, that was absolutely by design.
Which brings us to Chapter 1, A Fifth Avenue Fairy Tale.
To really grasp the sheer grandeur of this fairy tale, just imagine a store literally wrapping its massive Beaux-Arts building in giant purple ribbons, like a monumental gift to the city. They actually did this to celebrate their 111th anniversary. Now you might be wondering, why the 111th and not the big 100? Well, their centennial landed in 2001, and the executives made the very respectful call to halt all celebrations following the September 11 attacks. So, a little over a decade later, they definitely made up for lost time in the most visually spectacular way you can imagine.
And the loyalty to this store, it was practically genetic for New Yorkers. The late great Joan Rivers summed up this generational lore flawlessly. She used to joke that her first trip to Bergdorf's was probably in utero because her mother shopped there constantly. For families of a certain means, Bergdorf's wasn't just a store. It was a fundamental, baked-in part of the fabric of city life.
Okay, let's look at Chapter 2, From Tailor to Titan.
This whole empire actually started out super humbly back in 1899. Herman Bergdorf, an immigrant from Alsace, opened a modest tailor shop just above Union Square. But the real spark, the real game changer, was a young apprentice named Edwin Goodman who bought into the business in 1901. After eventually buying Bergdorf out entirely, Goodman put his foot on the gas and drove a really swift, strategic geographic march uptown. He moved the shop to 32nd Street, then up to 616 Fifth Avenue, where, by the way, he became the first couturier to introduce ready-to-wear fashion. Finally, in 1928, they planted their flag at their current legendary location at 58th and 5th.
Now here's what's truly fascinating about that 1928 move. It was a massive, bet-the-farm kind of gamble. Edwin Goodman built on the former site of the Cornelius Vanderbilt house. He was actually so unsure if his wealthy customers would even travel that far uptown that he designed the store so it could be sliced up and rented out if the business flopped. But no way did it flop. Not only did he survive the Great Depression, he astutely bought the entire building and eventually acquired the mortgages for the whole darn block. Talk about a payoff.
And that bold, visionary spirit, it passed right down the family line. When Edwin's son, Andrew Goodman, took the reins as president in 1951, he really scaled things up. He launched the famous First Salon, rolled out the wildly successful No. 9 perfume, and spearheaded massive expansions throughout the late 50s and 60s that nearly doubled the store's footprint to a staggering 120,000 square feet. That is a lot of retail space. Moving on to Chapter 3, The Art of Styling.
So, what really set them apart from other luxury department stores? It was their guiding principle. Heavily championed by legends like fashion director Ethel Frankow, they were curating wearable art. This wasn't just shopping. When evaluating collections, every single piece had to perfectly synergize with the Bergdorf vibe. The clothes didn't dictate the store dictated what was worthy of being on the floor. They even pushed unusual techniques, like the bias cut long before it was trendy, simply because they prioritized the pure artistry of the styling over just, moving inventory.
Christian Louboutin's early days are a perfect example of this supportive environment. I mean, imagine being a young designer, barely knowing how to even price your own work. Instead of taking advantage of his inexperience, Bergdorf's actually mentored him. They stepped up and placed a massive 330-pair order right out of the gate, which essentially helped launch his entire red-sold empire.
And let me tell you, that art-focused nurturing support was deeply reciprocated by the fashion world. Fast forward to that 111th anniversary party we talked about, the world's top fashion houses practically bent over backwards to honor them. Designers crafted over 100 unique, totally exclusive pieces just for the occasion. We're talking a Tom Ford lavender alligator bag designed specifically to match Bergdorf's classic purple shopping bags, a custom Alexander McQueen ruched velvet dress, and of course special pyramid-studded platforms from Louboutin himself.
All right, on to Chapter 4, a pop culture pillar. Because of all this prestige, Bergdorf's quickly became the ultimate pop culture shorthand for American luxury. In the classic film How to Marry a Millionaire, it was the absolute prime hunting ground where Marilyn Monroe and Lauren Bacall staked out the mink department to meet wealthy men. In Ocean's 8, it's the site of an elaborate, high-end cosmetic heist. And hey, if you are a fan of Parks and Recreation, you definitely remember April Ludgate's hilarious alter ego Janet Snakehole, right? She proudly bragged that her wealthy husband kept her draped in the finest Bergdorf Goodman clothing. It's literally everywhere in media.
But this wasn't just a Hollywood prop. It was a very real, very exclusive destination for global icons. This is where Princess Grace Kelly actually went to pick up her wedding invitations. It's where Jacqueline Kennedy personally sourced her dress for JFK's inaugural ball. For decades, it was a true crossroads for royalty, presidents, and the absolute global elite.
Now, precisely because of its immense prominence, the building has also been the backdrop for major, highly publicized news events. Most notably, this includes an incident that took place in a Bergdorf dressing room back in the 1990s. That specific event became the centerpiece of a major civil lawsuit, which ultimately culminated in a 2023 civil jury finding former President Donald Trump liable for sexually assaulting journalist E. Jean Carroll at the location. It's a stark reminder of how deeply woven this physical space is into the broader historic and public record of New York City.
Which brings us to our final chapter. Chapter 5, The Retail Reality.
So here's where the fairy tale hits a wall. That family-run independence, it just couldn't last forever. By 1972, tightening profit margins forced a merger with Broadway Hale Stores, and that kicked off a long, incredibly complex chain of leveraged buyouts and ownership changes. The brand was spun off into the Neiman Marcus Group in 1987, it was bought out by private equity in 2005, and finally, it was acquired by Saks Global in 2024.
And to put that 2024 deal into perspective, when Saks Global acquired the Neiman Marcus Group, absorbing Bergdorf's in the process, the price tag was a staggering $2.7 billion. Billion with a B. It was this incredibly ambitious, high-stakes merger designed to completely consolidate the luxury market under one roof.
But, as it turns out, that massive $2.7 billion buyout essentially set a ticking clock. Just a little over a year later, on January 14, 2026, Saks Global filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. It was a shock to the system. This absolute titan of retail had finally stumbled under the crushing weight of modern corporate pressures.
Now, this collapse definitely wasn't about a lack of beautiful clothes or talented designers. It was a perfect storm of harsh business realities. We're talking heavy, crushing corporate debt from the very merger that formed them, rapidly inflating retail prices, and a massive, sudden shift in how modern consumers actually buy luxury goods. The old business model that had successfully insulated the store from the outside world for over a century, it just couldn't protect it from the brutal changing tides of retail finance.
So, I want to leave you with this final thought to chew on as we wrap up this explainer. In an era completely defined by massive corporate consolidation, overwhelming debt loads, and sweeping retail bankruptcies across the country, can the high fantasy and the emotional stillness of this 127-year-old New York fairy tale possibly survive the modern retail apocalypse? It is a huge question, and you can bet the entire fashion world is watching very, very closely to see what happens next. Thank you so much for joining me today, and keep exploring.